Yo, it's your boy Logos. And it's been a long time since I've done the FD Signifier video, and that's mainly for two reasons. One, his ideas and the stuff that he supports really doesn't make sense to me. Factually, logically, however you want to shape it. And two, if I'm just being honest, the length of his content is pretty, I don't know, strenuous. And I'm typically not a person that cares about the length of a person's content if it's really good quality. Favorite podcast, my favorite form of content, if I'm being honest, is Dan Carlin. And he has multi-episode, multi-hour long series covering things from World War II, from Greek history, Roman history, everything in between. I'm never bored. I listen to those multiple times. Probably at least 200, 300 hours of just listening to Dan Carlin and his podcast alone over the past 5, 7 years. So there's no issue with long form content, but when I'm just hearing a whole bunch of nonsense, and it's just hard for me to take it seriously, I want to keep doing it. But this is a little bit different. I love professional wrestling. I've been watching it since I was a very young kid, thanks to my dad. He introduced it to me. And I kind of fell off of it starting in, I would say like 2011, maybe even a little early, like 2008. But over the past year or so, I've gotten back into it, especially with the whole bloodline. Now The Rock is introduced, Cody Rhodes, all these different things has got me back invested in wrestling again. Like I wasn't until I was like 6 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old. Ruthless aggression era. Graham is a fan of wrestling too. He grew up in the same era that I did, watching the same wrestlers. My favorite wrestler growing up was Batista. I think his was Jeff Hardy. And I think Jeff Hardy and his whole thing, his popularity, may come up in this video. Because I saw some comments trying to compare Shelton Benjamin to Jeff Hardy, and it's not the same. I do think Shelton Benjamin should have been pushed a lot more because he was so good in the ring in terms of athletic ability. But Jeff Hardy was over, like over with the fans. It was ridiculous. Everybody loved Jeff Hardy. Only reason he wasn't more, I don't know, accomplished, had more titles, because of his own personal issues, drugs, alcohol, from my understanding, whatever else it may be. That's what held him back. But in terms of people supporting him, people loving Jeff Hardy, he had everybody, all the kids, adults. Everybody was doing the dance. Everybody had their armbands. Everybody wanted to, dress and, be a fan of Jeff Hardy. But let's get into the video because I'm curious to see if I can find common ground with FD Signifier because the BS with Vince McMahon and the stuff he did as the chairman, the owner of WWE, is widely known. The bullshit with Booker T and some other people, black or not, is widely known. So he gonna have some good shit to say about that. So that's why I figured I give him another shot. Just because I disagree with him on other videos, other topics, even in other people's videos that he was guessing in or providing evidence in, quote unquote evidence. That doesn't mean every single thing he says or does is gonna be completely wrong. Now, past, or in the future. So I'll give him a shot. Let me know what you think. And if you like it, I'll do the rest of this video because this ain't gonna be done in one part. Oh nah. But let's get into it. Rest in
Ever
peace.
since I was a little boy, like literally a little boy, 6, 7 years old, I have always loved wrestling, and I have vivid memories of so many big moments in wrestling stuck in my brain. Whether it's when Ric Flair won the 1992 Royal Rumble and became the WWF champion, which ruined like my whole year. I was praying as I watched, hoping that the Ultimate Warrior, who was my favorite wrestler at the time, would suddenly come back to stop this from happening, and it didn't. I remember getting hyped every time I heard the Hardy Boys music and saw them run out onto the stage. I remember Kurt Angle. I remember Taz's debut. I remember Chris.
I think in terms of just pure wrestling ability and everything that goes on with the business, Kurt Angle is like the best of all time. He can wrestle his ass off. He can do athletic shit in the air, like his I think moonsault that he did in WrestleMania 21 or 22 against Shawn Michaels. He can talk on the mic. He's funny. He can do every single thing. Other things that other wrestlers do great at, like The Rock and his talking ability, Kurt Angle might not be as good at that, but he far surpasses him in terms of wrestling and other things too. That's not a knock on The Rock or Stone Cold, John Cena, who you're a fan of. That's just my personal opinion. Kurt Angle had the total package, and he won the gold medal with a broken freaking neck. In my opinion, he is the GOAT of wrestling in terms of ability. Maybe not in terms of, investment into the company or the overall business. If you want to have that argument, I'll probably say The Undertaker. Because, come on, like, it's The Undertaker. I can't, that's all I got to say. I could make a whole list of things, but it's The Undertaker. We know who he is. We know what he signifies, what he accomplished. He's that guy. But you could throw in other people too.
Jericho's debut. I remember the finger poke of Doom, which probably made me turn off the TV. I remember discovering wrestling in Japan. Like, for nearly 30 years, barring a few short or extended breaks when people like John Cena or Triple H figured they should never lose, I have always watched wrestling. If you watch my content, literally going back to my very first video as a YouTuber, you can see that wrestling has always been an influence on me and my content. But
if you're a fan of this era of wrestling, or even this current era, or even the ruthless aggression where I grew up in, Ram grew up in, check out Jim Cornette and his podcast. He is hilarious. He has had me dying laughing on many occasions. He'll give you like more insight into the business if you're interested into that stuff. Especially if you like the era with the Attitude Era. That's when he was the writer and he was a commentator and many other different positions in the company, WWF. So definitely check him out. Great podcast. And actually, CM Punk gave him a shout out on Monday Night Raw 2 nights ago, or a few nights ago. So definitely check him out. High quality content and hilarious.
Up until the last month in preparing for this video, I hadn't watched maybe more than 5 minutes of a single wrestling show in nearly 5 years. At first I thought it was because of COVID, like COVID kind of just made me just not interested in watching wrestling because the product looked different and felt weird watching crowds going to stadiums still in like 2021, 2022. The whole situation just made it less fun to watch, but I realized I was kind of done with wrestling a little before COVID. And when I thought about it longer, it hit me that it probably started from one very specific moment in wrestling back in 2019.
Is sponsored by Ghost Recon Breakpoint, available now, and Brock Lesnar quickly with Kofi Kingston.
So yeah, this was horrible, but we're not ready to talk about it yet. We have to put it into greater context, but suffice to say, as a black fan of the WWE, I don't know if I'd ever felt more disappointed, and considering the WWE's history with black wrestlers, that's saying a lot. And that a lot is going to be the topic of this video as best as I can with this long of a video. And I know I make long videos, but like there's no way I can really get into the entirety of this subject in just one video, but I'm gonna do my best to make it not a 4-hour long joint. So let's not waste any more time, shall we? Here is the complex history of black wrestlers. So let's start with a little secret. Wrestling isn't a real sport. You might even call it fake.
I wouldn't call it fake. It's scripted.
This may
When you fall wrong and you and your fucking bones stick out your skin on national television, that wasn't scripted. Or that wasn't fake. That's real. I would say scripted is a more appropriate word to use because, of course, it's determined who's going to win every single time. There may be, the closest you'll get is like a last second change or a change on the fly because of an injury. But yeah, it's scripted. But there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't take away from risk or like the overall storytelling when it's good. That's why I fell off with wrestling. It just wasn't, I don't know. It just didn't feel good to watch as it used to be. The stories wasn't as intriguing. Everything felt stale. And plus I got older over time, so I got new interest. But now with the bloodline and all this other stuff with Cody and The Rock, because of writing, because of talking, not because of fighting and tricks or weapons or none of this bullshit, that's why I'm back in the wrestling.
May be shocking to some of you, I know, but yes, the end results to 99.9% of all activity in the wrestling ring is predetermined. Of course, I say this sarcastically. Hopefully people realize and recognize sarcasm here. And the purpose of that is to ward off comments from people who think they're really smart, that think they'll be blowing my mind by telling me that wrestling isn't real as a 41-year-old man who's been watching it for 30 years. And you'd be surprised how often this still happens in 2024 when you tell someone that you watch wrestling. It's like they think in their heads that everything else that they watch on TV is real, like the Avengers are real. I don't know. Anyway, it's more accurate to look at wrestling like a long-running perpetual soap opera where the drama plays out in the ring and backstage. And unlike most stories in movies or TV, the thing that makes wrestling great is that the bad guys often win in wrestling. And what that does is make the story that much more interesting and unpredictable. And the best wrestlers know how to play into that unpredictability. Professional wrestlers are one part athlete, one part stuntman, one part actors, and they tell stories through their bodies. And I really can't explain enough how magnificent and deep and powerful some of these stories have been throughout the years, but also how incredibly awful some of them have been as well. And from early on, black men have participated in this unique form of live theater with very mixed results and often in very limited capacities. For the first 100 or so years of wrestling as a public spectacle, the predetermined nature of it was not publicly acknowledged. And thus many of the first professional wrestlers were actually multi-combat sport athletes, and one of them was named Viral Small. Small was a major attraction as a former slave who had survived homelessness, prison, and a bullet to the neck in the pursuit of a variety of athletic endeavors, and including real, like original catch wrestling, which is kind of like an early form of MMA, as well as a boxer. But in between time, he participated in what are called worked matches, aka what we understand today as professional wrestling. So this video is going to have a lot of jargon that is going to be unfamiliar to those of you who are not hardcore wrestling fans. So as much as I can, I'll just be pointing to those to pop up here over my shoulder, hopefully, because I'm not recording in my usual space and shit is a little... We're going to see how this works out. But either way, be prepared to either pause to see those definitions, and I'll probably leave a link to a couple in the description. Small was followed by several other black figures such as Frank Crozier, Reginald Siki, the original Black Panther, Jim Mitchell, but the first major figure to break out into modern day wrestling fame was named Bobo Brazil. Bobo's kind of like the Jackie Robinson of wrestling. He broke the color barrier and technically was the first black man to ever win a championship of a major wrestling organization, although that championship is not recognized. But still, it was a big deal even if it was just for one night. What happened was, in kayfabe, his opponent was disqualified, and Bobo was just too gracious and too good-natured of a competitor to take a championship belt off a contest that he didn't win on the most noble terms. Controversial promoter Billy Wolf, who helped pioneer women's wrestling, likely for all the wrong reasons, introduced three black women, Ethel Johnson, Babs Wingo, and Marva Scott, who, as far as I can tell, were the first black women to wrestle in a major organization. I won't talk a lot about black women's participation in wrestling throughout history, and not a ton even forward as we get to the modern era, mostly because there's just not a lot to say, unfortunately. For years, the wrestler Jackie was the only black woman to really have a spot at the top of wrestling's food chain, and she's arguably the greatest black woman to ever hit a ring. She's a multiple-time champion in various companies and an overall workhorse who put everything into whatever she was given. But beyond her, there just wasn't a lot of opportunity for black women up until probably the last decade or so, which isn't surprising given that black men weren't given many opportunities and there weren't many opportunities for women in general in wrestling. So black women were pushed to the side even more. Things with black wrestlers don't really start getting interesting until the 60s and 70s, where more and more characters begin to emerge in the form of the aforementioned Bobo Brazil, but also Big Bad Ernie Ladd, the legendary Sweet Daddy Siki. These figures weren't just participants in wrestling promotions, they were headliners and main eventers, and they were showing that unique element black men have always been able to bring to any entertainment endeavor: exaggerated swag.
The way he leaps off of rooftops and flips backwards to face the camera before falling into a headfirst dive is just full of the exaggerated swagger of a black teen.
Yes, we're still there. That term is just, it's the term that keeps on giving. But
It's so funny. And from my understanding, IGN, they try, I think that's IGN, they try so hard to be, you know, inclusive or woke or whatever you want to call it, but they try so hard and then end up being exactly who they don't want to be a part of. Like, just live your life. Be normal. Be decent. Stop trying to, I don't know, try to be a paragon or some type of ally. I don't need you to be an ally. Just review the fucking game. That's what I came for. Review the game. Tell me how the game is. Jesus.
By the 80s, a lot of the hand-wringing around actual participation was gone. Most promotions had a few black headliners, but now a pattern was emerging. Black wrestlers were more than welcome to join in on the big fun, be a part of the big show, maybe even challenge the champion, but be a champion or a headliner, that was not happening. At this time, not only is wrestling as a media commodity still very much in its infancy, but black people, especially in the 60s, are still living in a pre-modern reality where segregation is still kind of a thing. Even as segregation ended after the 1960s, most of the country still wasn't in any way connected to each other across racial lines. It was still rare to see a ton of interaction between black and white people. And when you consider that real life boxing champions who were white were hesitant to fight black fighters in true contests for decades, you best believe that the make-believe matches in wrestling were not going to offer a lot of fake opportunities for black wrestlers. Now, considering that wrestling isn't real, you might wonder, why should anyone care if black wrestlers aren't allowed to be portrayed as champions? What difference does any of this make if wrestling's all fake? And my response to that is, shut the fuck up.
Actually, yeah, I agree. I agree with him actually 100% on that. Because you're making absolutely no sense. Being champion elevates you within the company. More opportunities for endorsements. You're in the front in terms of TV time, so more merchandise sales. All this stuff plays into it. Like, you're guaranteed main event matches where people are guaranteed to stay and see you, where you're on the face of the billboard for these major WWE, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling events. All these different things, that's why it matters. And all this stuff helps you get more money and furthers your career. Plus, it can probably guarantee you can get more opportunities at that championship or other equivalent high championships. It might not be another WWE World Championship, but it might be the Heavyweight Championship, maybe the Intercontinental, and then maybe in a couple years you go back to the highest top title. That's why it matters. If you can't understand that, I don't know what to tell you. It's basically, it's just like a job opportunity. If you're saying that it's fake, it's scripted, it doesn't matter, you're really making no sense. You're flat out making no sense. These guys sign contracts, and these contracts can change to be better or worse, or be ended depending on their position on the roster. And everybody's fighting for TV time. I'm pretty sure that's going to be a factor when we go into stuff like Triple H, other people just using the power and influence they have over events for their own purposes, evilly, like what they did to Booker T and other top stars. Shawn Michaels, they did this to everybody. Black, white, Hispanic, it didn't matter. It was about power and control and making sure they stayed on top. I like Triple H now because of what he's doing with the company and creative, but back then, straight up piece of shit. And I'm pretty sure he could admit that. Shawn Michaels admits it. He had a whole change to God and stuff. He was spiraling because of his drugs and addictions and stuff like that. Triple H, he never had that issue. He never smoked. He never drank. He never partaked in this. So he was just an asshole, straight up.
Shut up. Shut the fuck. Seeing black men as champions is nothing new. Jack Johnson became the first black heavyweight champion boxer way back in 1908 and was followed by a litany of black champions to the point where today a white champion is genuinely a much bigger surprise. In fact, most of America's top sports are dominated by black men right now. Black men as brutes and physical marvels is nothing new, nor is black men being hyper talented or gifted in a multitude of ways, but wrestling is different because it's not a sport, it's sports entertainment. It's not a sporting event, it's live theater. And success there hinges more on the acceptance and love of an audience. And even then, there's a complex dance that a black man needs to perform in order to be truly celebrated and rewarded for their talent and ability within that realm. And there's this thing about wrestling that mixes the athletic spectacle with the character-driven stories and the mythology of the prestige of their champions and their titles, along with the interaction with the crowd that, at least for me, and I'm sure for many black fans, makes us long to see a black man at the center of that world, being heralded, being celebrated, loved, and recognized for those abilities. I've talked in other videos focusing on black men on how there's an ever-present sense that society outwardly despises you. And if and when you are ever loved and celebrated by society, it's almost always for a very specific performance of masculinity, one that tends to limit your options and dehumanizes you. So the spectacle of a black champion, like that concept of the champion representing all that is good and glorified about a given community, being a black man to win that type of award is powerful and desirable, both to embody, but also to witness secondhand. We want to see the crowds erupt for a black man is to be reminded of your value and humanity and what's possible. But there's a problem there.
But another fact that goes into it that he probably gonna touch on a little bit is the fact that this is scripted. There are writers, Vince is in control. Even if it's not Vince, it might be like Eric Bischoff, or right now AEW, it could be Tony Khan. There's a person that decides where you are on the card, who you fight against, what championships you got a shot at. And then they decide too, if you get a chance to actually, get the title. If the other person even, drop the title to you. Shawn Michaels, he didn't want to drop the title to Bret Hart. He didn't want to drop the title to other people, from my understanding. Bret was right. He just had personal issues with him. More so because Shawn Michaels was a piece of shit, not because of anything Bret Hart did or any issues on Bret Hart part. These things, wrestling and this whole racial thing, it does have an influence in it because, like he said, the crowd and the overall management decides who gets the top spot. Even if you are over with the crowd, you still might not even get it because they just don't like you. And it still happened even recently. For example, Bryan Danielson or Daniel Bryan, depending on what era, or I don't know, it don't even matter now. He goes by Bryan Danielson. But when he was in WWE, he went by Daniel Bryan. And he was over with the crowd probably more than any superstar I can remember. I'm not old enough to go back to The Rock when he first came up and see how that was, or Stone Cold Steve Austin. And though I have seen footage and old matches, but the yes movement, yes mania, all that stuff, Vince wasn't a fan of that stuff. It was a crowd that took over. Even now, right now, The Rock and Roman Reigns was supposed to be fighting next Saturday. Not this Saturday, next Saturday. Not probably for, the title, because it'll make no sense, because why? The Rock is going to stay for a while. But that was going to be the main event until the fans took over and decided they didn't want that anymore. They never wanted that to begin with. Probably, well, not this WrestleMania, not when Cody's a champion. Next year, yeah, that's perfect, that's fine. Or even wait till SummerSlam. That's perfect, that's fine. But just because the crowd wants something, it doesn't always mean it's going to happen. Also, the same thing in the way happened to Rey Mysterio. Vince really didn't want to have him get that title, but Rey was loved. He was loved by the locker room. And I think Vince probably liked him a little bit, but he didn't like the idea of a small guy getting the World Heavyweight Championship. And that's why throughout the entire reign of Rey Mysterio, they didn't call it the World Heavyweight Championship. They call it the World Title, because Vince, the person who's in control of the company, the owner, didn't want to do that to his title, his belt. He owned the company. So yeah, I agree with him where he said about the crowds, but also the management got a lot to deal with it. And the writers, all these different people. I was able to get more insight on this through the Jim Cornette podcast, the Jim Cornette Experience. So, like I said, check it out if you're interested in it. You love wrestling of any era, especially the older era.
Because in real sports, black men cannot be denied regardless of how they present. So black men throughout sports history have presented in different ways, whether they be perfect golden boys or revolutionaries or outright monsters who scare us. It doesn't matter, because if they were the best at a particular sport, what are you going to do about it? Sports is as close to a true meritocracy that there is. But outside of that meritocracy, black men struggle to find the same accolades and celebrations when there's other features involved that decide who is actually the best. And what we often find is that black men tend to find the most success and get the most attention when they're fitting into stereotypical images and roles that are not to be taken seriously, that are black men who are either devoid of complexity and humanity, or they're brutes who are violent and scary. That's when we often notice that black men get the attention that they desire. If we look at the WWE Championship in the same way we look at like the Oscar or an Academy Award, you kind of get the same ideology. And there's also a lot of synergy in how that has looked for black men. The first black actor to ever win an Oscar was Sidney Poitier for a movie called Lilies of the Field, a movie where he played a man that today would probably be referred to as a magical or acceptable Negro, something Poitier sadly often did throughout his career. Now, this is not to take away from Poitier's immense talent.
Somebody in the comments tell me what is a magical or a quote unquote acceptable Negro? Because my understanding of what I'm seeing, 'cause I know seeing these movies, he just coming off like a, regular, intelligent black man. That's it. So maybe he mean within his era, he's playing the magical role of like, oh, this is like the dime a dozen of a black man that can control himself or that is of class. Is that what he's saying? I hope that's what he's saying, because then I can understand it. But if he's trying to say it's like similar to like an Uncle Tom role, then he's talking bullshit. But I don't think that's what he's. I hope not. But stuff in the past I've seen from FD Signifier, and can't trust him
As an actor or his behind the scenes support for black liberation movements, but he knew that he'd never be able to reach higher levels in Hollywood unless he played into certain tropes around acceptable, non-threatening, and dignified black masculinity. Poitier rarely cursed, never responded to racism with genuine rage or hostility, and always remained humble and patient. He barely even had romance in most of his films. In Lilies of the Field in particular, he plays a character that basically is this magical Negro that randomly stumbles upon some hard on their luck white nuns from Germany and then builds them a house. It's like something that Clint Eastwood would do, except in reverse.
Now you're just gonna learn how guys talk.
Racial slur.
But it worked. He became the first black man to win such an award. Audiences saw this humble, pleasant, gentle black man who they weren't in any way afraid of, whether it be the stereotypes about black men being dangerous or the fears of black men being retributive against the racism that they suffer from. None of that was there, so he got an award for it.
Because it is a long journey to this moment, I am naturally indebted to countless numbers of people.
Unlike Muhammad Ali or Jesse Owens or any other black firsts before him, this was a contest where his victory depended on the approval and judgment of a white administrative body to see his work and proclaim it the best and decide to give him some award. And on the other end of the spectrum, literally 30, 40 years later, we have Denzel Washington, the second black man to win an award for Best Actor from the Academy. And Denzel Washington had an amazing career up until this point and had many an opportunity where he probably should have won an Oscar award. And he finally won it in the early 2000s for the movie Training Day for a role where he played an evil, dirty cop.
Yeah, oh shit, huh? Huh?
One of the most villainous, sinister performances you've ever seen on a movie screen. And don't get me wrong, it deserves to win an award just based off how good it is, but it says something about how it wasn't until Denzel played into this opposing extreme of a black male stereotype that he was finally awarded for his talent and skills. And this same dichotomy clearly
I don't know. Because this whole idea of whether or not it's Oscar worthy is completely subjective. Just because you like this performance this year doesn't mean there's another performance that same year from another actor that is better. So we have to go year by year with every other movie that came out that year, other participating actors that was in the Oscars or won the Oscar, to see if Denzel truly should have gotten there earlier. I don't know, because I remember Leonardo DiCaprio didn't get an Oscar for a long time. People was like waiting on it for a while, similar to LeBron and him getting his first title growing up. So like, I don't know about that. Plus, here's my thing too, like, I want black people to play roles as not just, stereotypes of any kind. You can play a good guy, you can play a bad guy, you can play a guy in between. And it doesn't have to be tied to your race or stereotypes or racial history or none of that shit. Like, just play a character. Similar to how white people or how any other race can, for the most part, play any character and nobody gives a shit. Like, for example, Sicario, I don't know why I can't remember his name right now. But the main character, I believe Benicio del Toro's character, he was like the cop or like the agent, but he was like a dirty cop that was killing people when he shouldn't have. He killed the whole family out of revenge, which understandable, but it's not right legally. I'm not looking at that like, oh, that's racial undertones. I'm just looking at that. This is a story about this guy and what he went through, what he decided to do for revenge. When I'm looking at Training Day, it's just a cop. There are many movies about dirty cops. Most of them are right. I'm just looking at the movie because it's a good movie. Not everything has to be racial.
Played out in wrestling pretty much from the beginning of black men participating in the sport. And the easiest example of this can be found in arguably the second greatest black wrestler of all time, the All-American Ron Simmons, who was the first black wrestler to truly hold a major championship belt in the modern era after winning the WCW title from Vader in 1992.
Got agility by Simmons, and Simmons, he got him in a power slam! He got him in a power slam! He got it! Simmons got it! Simmons just won the match!
Simmons had been to the WWE.
It's crazy. You heard what the commentator said? He won with a power slam. He didn't say he won with I don't know, some crazy ass move that's named after something. He won with a simple power slam. And you can make an argument it was more boring back then, but another way you could say it wasn't, because that was, in terms of like ratio to population, plus you didn't have TV and everything we have now, wrestling was at its biggest, or coming up on the point where it's going to be its biggest in the Attitude Era. It was just about, good writing, good storytelling. You didn't need crazy moves. You didn't need flips all the time. Having flips and doing jumps off of the top rope is cool because I like Jeff Hardy. I love Rob Van Dam, RVD, all these different people, Rey Mysterio. So it's not an issue with doing flips and tricks and stuff like that. There just has to be a balance. He won with a freaking power slam. It says a lot in the difference in wrestling, how much it's progressed. Good and bad, in a way. Gunther is probably the closest you're going to get to old school wrestling. He beats your ass like a straight up street fight. Chops, punches, kayfabe punches, within wrestling punches. Power slams, stuff like that. He just mauls you. And he looks like a freaking killer too at the same time. He's very old school. It's just very crazy just to see the difference.
WCW for a few years up until that point, mostly as a mid-carder and tag team specialist. But after the legendary Ric Flair left the company earlier in the year, the people who controlled the company took a shot at Ron Simmons, not just as a main eventer, but a title holder. In many ways, Ron was and continues to be a Sidney Poitier-like figure ever since, though with some important departures we'll get to later. He was billed as the All-American, playing on his football background as a former college football star and NFL player. He was a typical clean-cut babyface with an amazing physique and ring presence, along with a booming speaking voice that you had to have heard in its prime then and now to really appreciate. And like many other black firsts in history, he was well-mannered, resilient, and dignified. He was a black man capable of resisting racist vitriol. See again, Poitier, but also Jackie Robinson, Barack Obama, etc. And him dealing with racism was an intrinsic part of his championship story. And while not done overly well, there was something to be appreciated about the fact that when Simmons was faced with racism on a couple of occasions, he got to respond to it with the appropriate energy.
7 different times I was world heavyweight champion, and I had a like you carrying my bag.
Well, that was too insulting.
While his reign was a pretty big deal, it wasn't as huge a deal at the time since WCW was years away from being as big as it would be during the late 90s. Very much a second fiddle to the WWE than the WWF. Still, I remember seeing him as a champion and being blown away at the image of it. There was something deeper than I think I can describe about seeing a black man with that title belt. Sadly, his title reign...
I don't know, you could, in the video too, you could just see he's loved in the locker room. Because here's the thing, a third factor, and I think I kind of mentioned it too. For you to win the title, the person that you're pinning has to, be cool with it. They had to be willing to, put you over. That's the wrestling term of letting you win, letting you get the crowd recognition, getting the title, stuff like that. Sometimes you don't even have to get a title. For example, Jeff Hardy and Undertaker, they had their match. I can't remember the year, but it was the early 2000s. when Jeff Hardy was like really popping off, the crowd and everything. And it was testing him out to see if he was championship material. And after the match, Undertaker raised up Jeff Hardy's hand, even though he beat Jeff Hardy from memory. I think Jeff Hardy might have won. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've seen it. But either way, that's another way they put these guys over. So seeing all these people around Ron Simmons after winning the title tells you the crowd, the guys in the locker room, the owner of the company, everybody involved wanted to see Ron Simmons win. And that's also a great thing to see. And I just want to point that out because I love wrestling and just talking about it, interesting. Even if it's from a guy who I typically don't agree with on things, I appreciate this video because he's just going through the history of wrestling. And I'm learning it. I'm learning stuff here. I love history. I love wrestling. This is perfect. So I'll give him that.
Something deeper than I think I can describe about seeing a black man with that title belt. Sadly, his title reign didn't go great, and only a couple of years after it was over, he was out of the company. But it says something to say that WCW, an inherently Southern and not so progressive company, managed to put a title on an African-American wrestler way back in 1992, and then did it again in 2000 with Booker T. And if
just because you're Southern doesn't mean you're racist. Or that you have something against black people. For example, Jim Cornette, the guy that I mentioned a couple times throughout this reaction video, he is Southern as hell. He was born in Kentucky. He grew up in the prime era of, oh, I'm sorry, he didn't grow up. He worked in the prime era of wrestling, the Attitude Era, the early 2000s. He even worked under TNA and tried to save that company too. And he is Southern as it gets. The way he uses words and insults, it reminds me of like old South country, like just rhetoric. And it is funny as fuck. And he is not racist at all. They tried some bullshit with Jim Cornette this past week trying to say that he's racist against Mercedes Moné. Straight up nonsense. Straight up nonsense. There are multiple videos and multiple rants of this guy straight up hating. Hey, the only person I could say, or the only group of people I could say he hates more than MAGA, Trump supporters, conservatives, or like people he hates within the wrestling business. And Vince Russo. He hates Vince Russo. Only people that's in that realm of category, but still not even close to Vince Russo, is bullshitters. So, yeah, and when I say bullshitters within the wrestling company. Black, white, etc., etc. But he hates MAGA people. He hates conservatives. Just because you're from the South doesn't mean you're racist. And he was from the South working in Southern wrestling. He had his own like sub wrestling company. Well, not want to say sub because he worked with WWE. But I think it was his own company that was in the South. And there was no issues with race from my understanding. There has been no history with racial issues with Jim Cornette, from my understanding. There's multiple videos him praising black wrestlers and liking black wrestlers, from my understanding, and that I've seen myself personally. So just because you're from the South, it doesn't mean you're racist.
Ron is the second greatest black wrestler of all time. Booker T is the first. So it boggles my mind that both of these men eventually also wrestled in the WWE and neither ever made it to that same level. In fact, beyond just that 8-year period between Ron Simmons and Booker T, up until relatively recently, the WWE would never have the same level of representation for their black stars. And
well, Booker T, he got the World Heavyweight Championship at least once. Of course, the time that he got it is when I hated him the most growing up because he won the King of the Ring. So he went by King Booker. And he did all this BS where he wore a crown, a robe, and asked people to, and told people to kiss his feet and kiss his ring. I swear I hated him so much growing up. So that's not completely true. He didn't get the WWE Championship, but he got the World Heavyweight Championship. And just because you didn't get the WWE Championship doesn't mean you were trash. Because Batista, The Undertaker, all these other people, they got the World Heavyweight Championship. So, you could say that we look at the WWE Championship as, you know, the prime belt for the company. True, but nobody was gonna top John Cena. Nobody was gonna top Triple H. And Triple H, by the time John Cena came around and I was watching it, he was taking more of the back seat. Yeah, well, not really, because he had more title reigns after, but it was more so John Cena and younger people like Randy Orton. But Batista really didn't have the WWE Championship. He had the World Heavyweight Championship. So, he's right to a certain degree.
In fact, it has probably the most sketchy past of engaging with blackness in this program. I think the best distillation of the problem with how the WWE has historically imagined black wrestlers can be found with a guy named the One Man Gang, aka George Gray. Gray's character, the One Man Gang, was basically a 70s, 80s type street thug, biker gang type of guy that you might see get shot by Charles Bronson in a Death Wish movie back then. He was a mid-carder and part-time tag team wrestler with Slick as his manager. Slick being a very stereotypical character that we're going to see over and over in the WWE going forward.
Is just what it's all about. And you know, Daddy, I'm just about the happiest man in the world right now.
Gray portrayed the one-man gang for years until, according to him, Vince McMahon began prepping him for a change in gimmick. Sometime later, we have this skit, right, where Slick pops up on TV in what's supposed to be the Watson LA, which is, yeah. And he has a boombox on his shoulder and he starts playing this jungle music.
Brother, it's time for it to start right now. Let the ceremony be.
And then out of the blue, some black folks in tribal costumes start running around and dancing. They have black tribal guys running around the Watts, chanting and shouting African gibberish.
I cannot believe this. Absolutely incredible. Call a lawyer. Get an out-of-court settlement on this. Maybe I'll re-up my subscription to National Geographic.
And then Slick says,
Behold! And behold, Akeem!
And there he is. We meet Akeem, the African Dream, wearing a yellow dashiki and a matching hotep hat, and he's dancing like he's doing this dance. I cannot describe it. I don't know how to explain this. I don't know how much of it I'll be able to show, especially if you're watching this on YouTube. But yeah. And the thing that's so wild is that they put so much effort into this. Like for WWE TV, this was the full-blown production that they would have when they wanted to get someone behind a new character. Akeem the African Dream was born. And in case you were confused and said, well, maybe this man was like Creole or just really light-skinned or something, maybe he's on that Drake type energy, like no. George Gray was a white man from the Midwest, and everyone knew this. But for some reason, Vince McMahon thought it'd be cool or funny to turn him into a hotep. And then he's on the way to the ring, still doing this whatever this is. Like, it's almost a muscle, but like it's not. It looks very different. It's not. How bad does this look? We're just gonna somebody make a GIF out of this. I don't know. Probably the worst thing about this whole debacle was that it was cynical from the beginning. It's hard not to notice that Akeem's name and mannerisms look a lot like Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream. This whole farce was on some level an opportunity for Vince McMahon to use his company to poke fun at a rival, something he is known for. So let's talk a little bit.
And he did that with multiple different superstars. Like he either had these weird obsession with gimmicks like the plumber or all this other bullshit. I can't go through the whole list because it's been a while since I've listened to or read through it all. But Vince did this at the time, especially because he was scared for his life because he had that whole court thing, I think, due to steroids. And then in addition, WCW was coming around, taking superstars, offering way more money to superstars he couldn't afford, to the point where he had to pay Shawn Michaels millions of dollars, even though he didn't wrestle for like 5 years. So Vince was, for one thing, being ridiculous, and two, was desperate to try to fill any gap he could to try to put any superstar over to replace people he loved. This was one of many. It was idiotic.
A bit more about Vince McMahon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to All American Wrestling and a Happy New Year to you all. This is Vince McMahon reporting.
So anytime you see some fuckery, black or otherwise, on WWE TV, 9 times out of 10, there is an out-of-touch old white man behind the scenes making it possible. But Vince McMahon, the owner and lead creative force behind the WWE, wasn't just out of touch, he's kind of an evil villain.
Who the hell do you think you are? I've got an insatiable appetite for life, and I want more, more.
If Vince wasn't if he wasn't like how he is on TV in real life, he would be one of the still think if you separate the evil shit he did and you talk about Vince on screen as the evil boss, he was one of the best heels of all time. It's crazy that he thought he could just do the same shit in real life and not have consequences. And it's a shame for all the people that he held back, he hurt, he assaulted, he trafficked. We don't know them all. Many of them had NDAs, hush money. Some of them are coming out because of this new thing that's going on over the past 3 or 4 months. All these other different people being involved with it in terms of the stuff they did at the office. Literally at the office while people are working around them. Had a whole room set up for this stuff with the whole trafficking stuff. And you know what I mean. It's been everywhere. But I really want, and I think Netflix are still doing it, but I really want a Vince McMahon documentary because he really transformed the whole wrestling business. Before him, there was territories and people just wrestle within their territory. The owners that operate these territories had, control over their superstars, but they still had the option to go other people in other parts of the country and wrestle and earn money, but it wasn't the same as it is now. But one company owns the whole country and they're worldwide with wrestling. It's not the same. So I would love the documentary. I would have loved to hear Vince himself talk about it, especially when he feels more free to do so now because he's older. He knows he's gonna die soon, but that's not gonna happen now because he's a piece of shit. So not only does he hurt people, but he takes away an opportunity to get a true documentary about the building up of the wrestling business, how it is today. And I really wanted to see that, but who knows if we get it now because he want to be a evil piece of shit. He just couldn't keep that to the screen. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why Stephanie and other people around him tried to get away. Plus, I think I don't know how I'm forgetting his son name. Shane McMahon. I'm about to call him Shane O'Mac. Shane McMahon. He left the company, but I think that has also to do with he understood he was gonna get the inheritance of it. Gonna go to Stephanie and Triple H. Or even so, I'm pretty sure he knows some stuff. Stephanie knows some stuff. Probably Triple H did too, and made sure to distance himself. And if it was something really heinous, hopefully eventually we'll find out. But it's just sad, man. He didn't have to be a complete piece of shit. He could just kept that to the TV screen and to the ring, but he couldn't do that. Oh, just had to be a villain.
Yeah, what's good in the hood? Let's hold it down, trying to take care of business. Keep it up, I'm a nigga.
Crazy
I enjoy destroying lives.
No lie, Vince McMahon is like...
He couldn't play the part where, I forgot who he said it to. I don't know if it was Triple H or Kane or something, but he said, "Come out, you grapist." And it was just the craziest thing amongst many crazy things that Vince has done on television in WWE. Much as I appreciate what he did for the business, come on, man.
A real life version of an 80s like B-movie evil corporate character. I have no doubt in my mind that Senator Armstrong from Metal Gear Rising is loosely based off him.
The weak will be purged, and the strongest will thrive.
You know what I see? I see your mother. I see two spoiled, ungrateful little rich bitches. That's what I see.
It is absolutely not. He's right. It is not the worst thing he's done to his daughter on screen. It's not the worst thing he's proposed to do on screen. From my memory, he wanted to have this whole incest angle with Stephanie. In another segment, he kisses Trish Stratus in front of his wife, who is playing the role of, I guess, like a woman that is a vegetable. I guess that's the best word to. That's the best way to describe it. She is like catatonic. She is not paying attention. She's like in a coma. She's in a wheelchair, and she can't move or anything at all. And he hits a Trish Stratus in a storyline in front of his wife, his real life wife. Like he has done so much crazy wild shit. Vince is he is an animal. He is a real life animal. He it, crazy. This is true. Vince McMahon doesn't like when people sneeze around him, and he sees it as a sign of weakness. When he sneezes, he gets upset at himself for that happening. When people sneeze around him, he says, "Control yourself." He says, "Control yourself" to a sneeze. Like people just want to be sneezing for the fun of it. This man is an animal. I wanted to have that documentary because there is no telling all the shit that we could have found out. But if you want to learn more crazy stuff about Vince McMahon, check out Jim Cornette. If you put in the search engine on YouTube and Jim Cornette, Vince McMahon, you'll find a whole bunch of crazy shit. Trust me.
That said, it also must be stated that the insecurity, the seemingly limitless appetite for cruelty and pettiness that is at the core of this man is probably why the WWE exists the way it is right now. Wrestlers have a lot of freedom to come up with their own ideas and gimmicks and test them out on some levels, but it's understood that Vince has final say of what goes on TV, and under his creative vision, McMahon was able to transform an industry that was akin to a loose coalition of traveling circuses into a billion-dollar corporation and media juggernaut. And you
sometimes the wrestlers have control, especially more so nowadays, but back in the old days, especially like in the 90s and 80s, Vince McMahon would put these bullshit gimmicks on people and they wouldn't work. I think, yeah, like The Rock, he almost didn't go over with the fans because of Vince McMahon and the writers and didn't understand how to put him in the ring and have his character be compelling enough for people to actually cheer for him and like him, even if he was talented. It wasn't until The Rock started becoming himself, acting like himself in the ring, that he actually got successful. And he talks about this on the Joe Rogan podcast like 6 months ago. So check that out if you want to see more about him talk about that. I think there was actually just a short clip of him talking about that particular topic on YouTube that you easily see. So go check it out.
You can't take that away from him unless, of course, you're his board of directors, but he's got a day in court coming literally. As I said earlier, wrestling is about the development of gimmicks and characters. Gimmicks and characters are the building blocks of how stories are told and how action flows in wrestling. The right combination of characters and personalities combined with the right combination of story ideas, themes, and long-term drama can make for the most engaging TV you've ever seen. And McMahon, while hit and miss, definitely was capable of a hit, or at least creating the atmosphere for one. But good Lord, these misses. So aside from Akeem, there's Virgil, who is basically my first introduction to Black Republicans. I don't know if Virgil is actually a Republican. It wouldn't surprise me considering how his career played out, but he definitely played a...
Like I've said in a previous video, when you're talking this nonsense, there's nothing wrong with being a Black Republican. Part of freedom that you have as an individual is to choose how you want to think, talk, and believe. And then you can defend that however you see fit in debate. So there's nothing wrong with a Black Republican. It's even funnier that he says so when he doesn't even debate. So on this accord, once again, he's full of shit.
A similar role for the WWE by being the manservant of the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, who would always have his back, always be there to pay money or be intimidating, or just serve as a distraction, likely to get his ass whooped in place of his boss. Ted DiBiase also, just as an aside, has one of the cruelest moments in the history of wrestling, and while also racially insensitive, is such a perfectly scripted moment of cruelty, but I can't help but appreciate it.
Little more.
Virgil went through his entire career like this until he eventually turned against his boss and finally started to speak again. But even then, he was basically still a jobber who never won. And he would reprise this same exact role in the WCW as a member of the NWO, which always didn't make sense until you realize that he was just there to take extra bumps that no one else wanted to take. To this day, I can't imagine how he was okay with this being the entirety of his career and character for so long. But I mean, he's still out there making money off of this character, so I guess there's something to that. When you get away from Virgil and other Black jobbers, you have a multitude of supernatural voodoo Negroes that have graced the WWE ring. The earliest was Kamala, who, dear God, Kamala. I don't have to say I don't have anything else to say. Look at Kamala. This was on TV.
For the conversion of the Ugandan giant, you opened up your heart to him. And in return, yes, he's opening up his heart to you. I'm not going to be responsible for what might happen if he gets one look at you.
I do agree that this is crazy. But right now, actively, right now, there's a tag team called the Viking Raiders that's in WWE. I don't see anything racial about the people of Sweden or Norway or any of these countries when I see, Viking Raiders. I think if you're a racist, you're gonna think that this is all black people to begin with, or all people in Africa. There's no swing, at least not through this.
On the flip side, you had Papa Shango, which while being still a bit of a, could be seen as offensive stereotype, I thought that shit was dope as a kid, and I still think the shit is kind of dope now. His look was dope. He would barely wrestle. He would just come to the ring and do some hand gestures, and then suddenly the lights would go out, and whoever he was supposed to be fighting would be laid on the ground with tar coming out of his face and probably his feet on fire. I think that's entertaining. I give it a pass.
Yeah, he did that against another jobber, it looked like. And you can tell he's a jobber because there's no way in hell that anybody on the roster would be along with this bullshit. It looked like you got hit by some magic in the wrestling ring. Like, come on, this guy has no symbols. He has no armbands. He just has a black shirt, some pants, and some wrestling boots. He's a jobber. He's talking about black jobbers right now. This guy right here is even below them in terms of this era of wrestling, because Macho Man Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, anybody that you name, black, white, anything at all, was not going to have this guy do this to them if they was having any chance of a career in wrestling. It made absolutely no sense. It's stupid. Same reason today that mid-card guys don't beat guys in the championship level. You're not going to have Ricochet beat Roman Reigns. It's not because anything racial. Well, that doesn't really count because they're both black. I think, Roman Reigns is like Samoan. I think he's black too. And Ricochet is black. So the racial thing can't even be said there, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to happen because within fake wrestling, quote unquote, these types of things, who you lose to and how you lose, matters. And he's probably going to go into that when it goes into Booker T, which probably won't get into this video, but my next reaction to part 2, that's probably going to go into. I'm going to watch a little bit longer, probably to the 30-minute mark.
Out, and whoever he was supposed to be fighting would be laid on the ground with tar coming out of his face and probably his feet on fire. I think that's entertaining. I give it a pass. I also maybe give a pass to the Boogeyman, who, I don't know, this one is, your mileage may vary, because the Boogeyman kind of transcended race. Like, he wasn't implied to be a black man. He was a supernatural being that ate worms. There's something to the idea of a black man walking around eating worms, but at least he wasn't a thug or a pimp, which we're going to get to those characters in a moment. This dude could barely wrestle. He would just come out, eat worms, do some creepy stuff, and then either get beat up or walk away victorious. It was, good for him, I guess.
Tonight, I will face whatever adversity life or the Boogeyman throws at me. Take a look, Crystal. Oh, God.
Oh, my darling. Oh, my darling. Oh, my darling. Clementine.
Oh, God.
Time's coming near, Sunday.
What?
For you to face your fear.
No, Daddy.
Those are the mild things. The more offensive stuff comes in the form of the way that the WWE always found them a big black sexual deviant guy. The first notable one was probably Mark Henry in his sexual chocolate era. And then we had Big Daddy V in his Big Daddy V era. McMahon, like so many white men, has a fetishized predilection toward black men's bodies and penises, which you can see from...
Hold on. McMahon likes men's bodies in general. Everybody knows that. It's not even the gay rate. He just straight up, because partially this man's addicted to working. He sleeps for 3 hours. Rates up, goes to work, works out, probably works again, work out, sleep for 3 hours. In between, he'll eat a couple times and do it all over again. He loves exercise and working out, steroids being used or not. And no matter if you're black, white, Hispanic, or anything else, if you're a small guy, Vince doesn't give a shit about you. I had that example earlier with Rey Mysterio, but it's widely known. Smaller guys, not huge bodybuilder looking guys, really aren't being put over. They're really not getting a lot of TV time. It's just really changing more recently. And I would say that's more so because Vince isn't around as much. Well, he's not around anymore because of what he did. But it's a whole thing Vince had with how male wrestler looked in general, not just race. He liked big, gigantic looking dude. That's what he liked.
Recently leaked text messages that he sent some woman he was sexually harassing at the WWE, which is why he's not there now. And this wasn't really necessary because Mark Henry was legitimately the world's strongest man as a professional powerlifter and Olympian, but all of that floundered early in his wrestling career and it didn't connect with the crowd. And until he was made into this comedy sideshow as a sex-crazed Barry White impersonator who didn't care one way or another what he was going to take home with him, he didn't get over. In kayfabe, he forms a relationship with a 70-year-old Mae Young and gets her pregnant, and she gives birth to a hand. I promise you, wrestling has really good stories sometimes. I promise you. Big Daddy V's run with this gimmick was less gross, but only by comparison. But understand, he had been mostly a jobber for years until he found a way to get this sexual deviant black guy act over. And this shows the prominent reality for how black men are required to appear in the world. If we don't show up in stereotype form, we basically shouldn't show up. Now, to be fair, many of these guys came up with their own characters in tandem with Vince, but I also imagine that they did this because they knew who the audience wanted to see. Too Cold Scorpio, Bad News Brown, Butch Reed, the aforementioned Papa Shango, who eventually became the Godfather, the man that gave us the Ho Train. These were safe acts to play out as a black man in the WWE. And even outside of the WWE, this continued to happen. One of the most extreme examples of this type of character was guys like Homicide, who's technically Puerto Rican, and most notably New Jack. New Jack is a horrible person. I don't want to have that be forgotten if you've seen other things about New Jack. But he also had this amazing gimmick in the 90s where he just said, look, I know y'all are racist, so I'm going to be the most perfect distillation of everything you hate about me in the ring. He took it to the extreme, literally.
Like me or not, I didn't come up here to be liked. I came up here to get paid. And whoever you put in front of me, I'm gonna drop you down. I like to send a special shout out to my homeboy, O.J. Simpson. Keep up the good work, baby.
And to be fair, this also wasn't just with black wrestlers. I don't know if I mentioned Yokozuna, who was a Samoan man playing a Japanese sumo wrestler, or Razor Ramon, a white guy playing a Puerto Rican, or Kai and Tai, or the Mexicools. There were also plenty of redneck, poor white trash characters, evil foreigners. Wrestling storytelling at that time, because it was so kid-focused, was built on stereotypes because American children could easily make sense of it. They wanted to see the American hero wrestle a cow. That's how it worked. But these stereotypes do not exist in a vacuum. They do have real life consequences. And a major part of this is Vince McMahon and his appetite for cruelty and need to control things, even if it meant making things worse.
I enjoy destroying lives.
So bad at times that it legitimately hurt the product.
Making love to a dead person, you know, a female dead person when you're a guy and you're in this thong type thing, it was like, come on. That is like high comedy if there ever is.
Vince was and is known to be purposefully bad at his job just to be petty and cruel to other people. He would diminish wrestlers' popularity and not do things that the audience likes just so that he can appear right.
You violated me!
He is truly a scathing indictment.
That's one of the funniest clips. Like, oh man. Like, Vince is an evil piece of shit. But he took a lot of bumps and embarrassed himself a lot too for the company. I can just remember the stuff I seen growing up. Not even including the Attitude Era. I've seen this stuff where Stone Cold beats his ass in the hospital room. I saw that full clip where he talked about Stone Cold violated him. This stuff with DS in the late 2000s, having stuff like shit from like a urinal dumped on himself and his son in the Spirit Squad, getting beat half to death, it looked like at WrestleMania by Shawn Michaels, at Hell in a Cell against DS, having his face put in Big Show ass at Hell in a Cell. Like, Vince McMahon is an evil piece of shit, but he took a lot of shit for the company too at the same time. That's what also I'm saying, like, I wish I had that documentary. Before he go to prison, can you just at least be honest for once in your life so we can see how you somehow manage all your evil tendencies and still build up this business? Can we get that? I don't think that's something crazy to ask for.
Of capitalism in that way, because he shows that the logical, true nature of capitalism and people being self-motivated isn't really true, because Vince is not always profit oriented. He's more just, I have the power, I get to do what I want oriented.
Well, the reason why he can do that is because he made enough profits already. He doesn't have to worry about it. Like, he doesn't have competition. That's why. This has nothing to do with capitalism and all that bullshit. You literally have sponsorships. You make money off of capitalism. Ads. Stop. Please stop. I'm liking the video for the most part. Stop the capitalism bullshit. That's the last thing you will.
So he will lose money out of sheer spite.
I'm an entrepreneur. I'm what makes this company, I'm what makes my company and this country go round and round. I take risk, calculated risk.
What's up, Holmes? To be clear, at the time, most of this stuff was seen as kind of in bad taste, but not so beyond the pale. So in terms of offensiveness, right? Good. I honestly am not as seriously bothered by a lot of it. It's just ridiculous to look at it in hindsight. But the thing that does bother me is that this stuff didn't have to be like this. It could have been better. It was a waste of a lot of talent and time just so Vince could get his way. You could write several books about the ways that Vince did this. As I alluded to earlier, Vince McMahon was recently removed from the company for misconduct allegations and lawsuits that are ongoing. And I hope it stays that way, and I hope it's for good. Vince aside, we have to come back to the fact that a lot of these black wrestlers went along with these gimmicks. Mark Henry himself says he came up with Sexual Chocolate because of his love for the movie Coming to America. They did this because they knew this is what the audience wanted from them. They know that the success of a wrestler or the wrestling company depends on putting white butts in seats and white eyeballs on television. And the history of media and sports in America tells us that white audiences really
Vince don't give a fuck. As long as it's a butt and a seat, they don't give a fuck what you look like. As long as you're paying your money, I highly doubt Vince would. I don't know. Maybe I'm tripping. Of course, that doesn't, discount how he treated certain superstars. But, like, come on. If a crowd cheers enough, and if they threaten to not pay any more money, Vince is gonna listen to them. White, black, or not. The majority of the population in America is white. Of course, the most majority of fans at the stadium are white. Who cares?
Don't want to consume black images unless they look a specific way. Again, Portier and Denzel Washington. But every once in a while, even within that like constrained way that they had to show up for TV, you do get a Papa Shango or one of my favorite acts from the last 15 years. Big Shad and JTG were your classic bruiser cruiser tag team duo. JTG was the skilled workhorse who would carry matches, and Shad was the flashy big guy who would do power moves and get the crowd going. This formula has been seen a billion times in wrestling throughout the history of it. So to stand out, they played into street thug stereotypes, but really in a wink and a nod type of way, where they took it beyond the actual stereotype and into the point of parody.
Yo, 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 yo. Pop a 40 and check your rollies. It's crime time. Time's game is so tight that JTG stops to give a shout out to his boy Dirty.
Shout out to my boy Dirty. Big up to Parkside and Flatbush.
Today, this act probably could not work, but at the time, It felt like something interesting and cool, something more, because it let these brothers in on the joke. And it got over big with audiences, and it wasn't one of those situations where I don't think audiences understood what was happening. Like, you know, Dave Chappelle talked about the fact that he didn't often know if the audience was laughing with him or at him. It was pretty clear that Crime Time, the audience was laughing with them at the concept of this over-the-top black street thug duo that stole things all the time. And even in its own very imperfect way, it.
And I just want to point this out because it's worthwhile. It's crazy that they played these two types of characters when both guys, from my understanding, are very upstanding guys. And him, I hope I'm saying the right person because I don't want to be disrespectful. But Shad, he passed away a few years ago because he died saving his son from drowning. I think he jumped into, I think maybe the ocean or some type of body of water to save his son from drowning, from my memory. If that's not exactly how it happened, I know it involved water and he died saving his son or some type of family member or some kid. So this guy is a very upstanding, honorable guy, and he still had to play this crazy character, which he probably came up with and enjoyed too, and as he's saying, the fans did. But I just want to point that out because not many people in the world, no matter where you look like, where you come from, have the courage to do what this man did and give up his life. Of course, you know, it's his kid. Many parents would do the same thing, but still, he made that sacrifice. So rest in peace to him. Hope his family doing good.
Showed how much more personality and character and uniqueness black wrestlers could have if given the opportunity. But even though Crime Time was incredibly over as a WWE tag team, they never won a tag team championship, which wasn't even super prestigious at the time that they were popular. During most of the late 2000s into the 2010s, the tag titles were an afterthought, but for whatever reason, still too prestigious to be held by an all-black team. In fact, since Rocky Johnson had won the tag team titles way back in the mid-80s with Tony Atlas, multiple all-black tag teams would exist, but rarely get a chance with the belts for years. At best, you would get maybe an interracial team where uber talented wrestlers like Shelton Benjamin would be matched with some guy that wasn't all that great in this biracial tag team thing. But you rarely saw something like Crime Time, which is what made them such a breath of fresh air. Yes, it had all the worst elements of what the WWE habitually did to black wrestlers, but it turned it on its head and made it into something different. Crime Time came and went, and people thought that they would return again eventually, but unfortunately in 2020, Shad Gaspard, who by all accounts was an amazing man and real life hero, died saving his son from drowning in 2020 before they could ever make another return. Shad is another example of a black man who's had to receive his flowers after he's left us. For decades, black fans of the WWE had to get used to giving their favorite black wrestlers flowers on the side, outside of the spotlight, having to be satisfied with the acknowledgement that real fans recognize the quality of their work, even if other fans, or more importantly, the administration of the WWE, never would. We've gotten our hopes up and seen pushes start and stop on a dime. We felt like wrestlers had everything they could possibly need to make it to the top, only for them to make it to the middle and basically just stay there. I mentioned Shelton Benjamin, but there's guys like MVP, D'Lo Brown, R-Truth. There's a long list of black wrestlers who were legitimately great talents, not just good in the ring, not just good on the mic, but good gimmicks, good looks. They had everything. But even with all these tools,
R-Truth, when he was more of a heel character, was really good. He's still good now, and he's back in WWE now, and he's still like playing like a semi-major role, but it's mostly within comedy. He's not playing anything serious, but he can be serious. I think he's a multi-time championship winner in another promotion, another wrestling company. Can't remember the name. There was so many at it. I think in the early 2000s, but he had a long stay in WWE because he was very close with Vince McMahon, which is, you know, kind of crazy because there's stuff we just watch with Vince McMahon. But Vince McMahon had close relationships with other black wrestlers. I think Titus Young or Titus O'Neil was another one. A few other ones I just can't remember right now because it's been a while since I got deep into that type of Vince McMahon type of content. Because when I was, you know, getting fresh back into wrestling a few years ago, I went back and tried to understand all the stuff I missed. But it's just kind of weird to see how Vince McMahon can be such a piece of shit in one way, but then down the line, certain black wrestlers he has close relationships with, but he can't give him a good push. I don't understand why MVP they didn't get a huge push. I love MVP. Okay, let me take that back. I liked MVP growing up. Sometimes he was like a baby face, but other times he was a heel and whiny. I didn't like him, but I liked him way more than Ken Kennedy. I hated Ken Kennedy growing up. My dad loved Ken Kennedy, but hated Kennedy. I hate him so damn much. But I don't understand why MVP didn't get a good push. There's probably a reason. Of course, there's probably a reason. It could be dealing with the whole racial stuff with Vince, but maybe something else. Who knows?
They might maybe sniff the top of the food chain, maybe be allowed to lose to John Cena once or twice, but they'll never ever get to a certain level within the company. And what makes it so bad is that to the untrained eye, it looks like many of these guys got every chance to be true headliners until you look at who wins the championship at the end of the day. Because the storytelling is so fluid, it's important for the WWE to make these guys look like they're legit contenders and give them strong pushes out of the gate with mid-card titles and little promo time and vignettes at the beginning. So people will say they had the opportunity and just couldn't get to that level, but we see the crowds react strongly to them. We see that they're over in every way that they have to be, except for in the actual rooms where they make decisions. Kofi Kingston is one of the more clear examples of this. Kofi started out with this Jamaican fun guy gimmick, which he paired with amazing ring work and great energy. This brought him to the top of the mid card in only a few years. And then we watched it in excitement as he started to rub elbows with headliners in 2009, working with soon to be multiple time champions like CM Punk, John Cena, and Chris Jericho, and started a feud with bona fide main eventer and former champion Randy Orton.
I like Randy Orton. He's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, but what he did to Kofi Kingston was a piece of shit move. And which is crazy because Randy Orton was a piece of shit early in his career. Like, he dropped the title, from my understanding, because he wasn't taking it seriously first time he got it. When he was the youngest World Heavyweight Championship, he was the person to be the youngest World Heavyweight Champion at the time. I think it was like 22 or 23. And then I think he fucked up backstage or something like that. He got a big head, big ego, and he ended up dropping the title to, I think, Triple H again. So, and the reason why Triple H and John Cena are the mainstays for the most part in the early 2000s, 2010s, up until about 8 years ago, is because they were just very stable people within the company. Those were two people that Vince McMahon trusted, and Brock Lesnar now, well, within the past 5 or 10 years, that he trusted with the World Heavyweight Championship or the WWE Champion, because it was Vince's title. He didn't want to have it, I don't know, look bad, have a guy that get involved with some crazy controversy like Randy Orton was in, or type of drama or some type of addiction, all that type of stuff.
One of the biggest figures in the game and one of the top guys in the WWE for over the last 20 years. But just as his feud was getting hot, Kingston was squashed and buried and shoot called stupid in the middle of the ring during a match where he made a mental error by Randy Orton. And then he was unceremoniously booted, no pun intended, to the end of the line for most of the next decade. Again, to be clear, this is not unique to black wrestlers, as Vince and a variety of figures with power in the WWE would constantly hold back other hot wrestlers just so they could keep their spots. But it definitely felt different and like a bigger waste than usual for a guy like Kofi Kingston. And with him and with other black wrestlers, it's hard not to notice that they're usually twice as good and twice as deserving than many of their white peers who suffered the same fate. For example,
I don't know, I want to see your comparison with the white wrestler. But another reason why Kofi really, it was hard for him to get over with Vince is because he was small, and because he had that issue. You could see it when he was just showing this picture with his chest. So he has, I can't remember the exact name of it, but he has some type of, I think, muscle, I don't know the exact medical term you want to use for it, but his chest muscles doesn't show in the same way that it does in a typical person. So it doesn't show off as good on camera, which matters when you're on camera in front of millions of people. Not to mention clips, videos, pictures, all this different stuff that you'll be involved in when you're just a mid-card wrestler. Not to mention the top guy. So that's probably another thing that held him back. Doesn't mean it's a worthwhile excuse for Vince or anybody else, but that was another factor to play. Plus, if he just straight up doesn't like you for whatever reason, which I doubt was an issue, because Kofi Kingston, I haven't heard any issues any person had with Kofi Kingston. Even when he does finally win the title, which he'll probably show within this video, probably pretty soon, the whole locker room was supportive of him. Everybody loved Kofi. So It could be multiple factors, but once again, you know, Vince is Vince.
Than usual for a guy like Kofi Kingston. And with him and with other black wrestlers, it's hard not to notice that they're usually twice as good and twice as deserving than many of their white peers who suffered the same fate. For example, Zack Ryder's whole internet champion thing was great and it was a moment, but it's nothing compared to the waste that is having R-Truth be a comedy act for the last decade when he's had everything possible to be a top tier heel or face for years now. And that seemed like all the WWE could be for decades as I watched from the mid 80s going into the late 2010s. It felt like if you were black, you could be a part of the show, and maybe you didn't have to even be Sidney Poitier. You can be something interesting between Sidney Poitier and Denzel Washington every once in a while. You could come and collect your checks and have great matches, but you could never be on the marquee. You could never be built around as the headliner. That just wasn't a spot for the black man in the WWE, unless, of course, if you count
what The Rock is cooking.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop right here because I feel like this is gonna be a whole separate thing, and especially with stuff currently ongoing with The Rock, I want to talk about it, and that's gonna probably take me a lot of time. And this is already almost an hour and a half, so I'll stop it right now. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Sorry if you hated me posing so much, but I don't know, it's the reaction and commentary. Can't just let it play out. But it is what it is. Like, share, and subscribe. It's your boy Logos, and I'll see you next time.